Every so often, a strange thing happens on the internet. All at once, a seemingly random collection of things stops working. A streaming service, a banking app, a smart doorbell, a government website, a video game, all dark at the same moment, for no reason any ordinary person could guess. And the cause, more often than you would ever imagine, is a problem at a single company. Not a social network, not a phone maker, but the quiet giant that rents out the computers a huge part of the internet actually runs on. Its name is Amazon. This is a series about the companies that run the world. And today it is Amazon, though not the Amazon you are picturing. Everyone knows the store, the endless everything shop that delivers boxes to your door. But the deeper, stranger power of this company lies somewhere almost nobody looks in the invisible business of renting out computing itself to much of the modern world. The story starts, famously, with books. In 1994, Amazon began as an online bookseller, then relentlessly expanded until it sold, more or less, everything. That alone would make it a giant of retail. But the truly world-shaping move came later, and from an unlikely place, the company's own boring internal problem of running enough computers to keep its website alive. To handle its own enormous traffic, Amazon had to become brilliant at building and running vast fleets of servers. And then it had a genuinely radical idea. If it was already this good at running computing infrastructure for itself, it could rent that very same capability out to everyone else. In 2006, it launched Amazon Web Services and quietly invented the modern cloud computing industry in the process. To grasp why that mattered, you have to understand what the cloud actually is. Before it, a company that wanted to build a website or an app had to buy its own servers, expensive and painful to manage. The cloud replaced all of that with something like a utility. Now you simply rent computing power, storage, and services on demand over the internet, paying only for what you use, the way you pay for electricity. The scale Amazon reached in this new business is staggering. Amazon Web Services became, and has remained, the largest cloud provider on earth, running roughly a third of the entire global cloud market. An astonishing share of the apps, websites, and services you use every day are, without your knowing it, physically running on computers owned and operated by this one company. And here is the twist that reveals the true shape of Amazon. The famous retail business, for all its size, runs on painfully thin profit margins. It is this quieter cloud business that has, for years, generated the majority of the company's operating profit. In a very real sense, the low-margin store that everyone sees is subsidized by the invisible computing utility that almost nobody thinks about. The bookshop is funded by the backbone. So what protects this fantastically profitable position? Partly it is sheer scale, the tens of billions poured into data centers around the world that a newcomer cannot easily match. But the deeper moat is lock-in. Once a company has built its entire software operation on top of Amazon's specific services, migrating away becomes so complex, so costly, and so risky that most simply never do. They are, in a quiet way, captured. Amazon does not rule the cloud unopposed, of course. This is one of the most important corporate battles of our age, fought between a small handful of giants. Amazon Web Services leads, but Microsoft's Azure is a powerful and fast-growing second, deeply embedded in the world's corporations. Google's cloud is a determined third. Between them, these three companies host a remarkable share of the digital world, a new kind of infrastructure oligopoly. The strange fragility of all this becomes visible on the bad days. When a single large Amazon data center region suffers a serious failure, the effects ripple outward with alarming speed and breadth. Services with no obvious connection to each other collapse together because they all, secretly, depend on the same underlying provider. Each such outage is an accidental X-ray, briefly revealing just how much of modern life quietly rests on this one company's machines. Now, the cloud is not the whole story because the retail empire is formidable in its own right. At its heart turns a self-reinforcing flywheel. Lower prices draw in more shoppers draw in more sellers, and more sellers drive prices lower still. Round and round it goes, each turn making the store a little harder to compete with. On top of that flywheel, Amazon wrapped its customers in the subscription loyalty of Prime, and built a delivery and logistics network so vast that it now rivals the traditional shipping giants. The store you see is, by itself, one of the most powerful retailers ever built. Go. But that marketplace hides a tension that echoes across this whole series. Amazon is not just the store, it is the landlord of a marketplace where millions of independent sellers must compete, while Amazon itself also sells against them, armed with all the data those sellers generate. Being simultaneously the referee, the stadium, and one of the players is a position of enormous power, and one that regulators around the world eye with deepening suspicion. So we reach the question this series always asks of what would truly break if Amazon vanished. The store, honestly, could be replaced. But Amazon Web Services is another matter entirely. So much of the digital economy is built directly on top of it, that its sudden disappearance would not be an inconvenience. It would be a systemic shock, cascading through countless businesses and services that could not simply rebuild their foundations overnight. Which leads to the uncomfortable question in one of its most modern forms. Is it wise for so much of the world's computing and so much of its commerce to run through a single company, one that is at once the essential utility, the dominant marketplace, and a competitor inside its own arena? The efficiency it delivers is genuine and enormous. But so is the concentration of power in a firm that quietly underpins a large slice of the digital world. To be fair, and it deserves saying, what Amazon built is genuinely transformative. The cloud it pioneered meant that a tiny startup, with almost no money, could suddenly rent the same computing muscle as a giant corporation, paying only pennies to begin. That single shift lowered the barrier to building almost anything online and helped unleash an entire era of innovation. And its relentless focus on the customer genuinely reshaped what people expect from commerce. And that is the deeper lesson of this particular giant. The most durable power turned out not to be in selling the most products, visible though that is, but in owning the infrastructure that everyone else builds upon. Amazon began by selling us things and ended by quietly renting the digital ground beneath a huge part of the modern economy, becoming a utility so fundamental that most of the world relies on it without ever once noticing it is there. So the next time an odd, unrelated patchwork of the internet goes dark all at once, and then, a while later, quietly flickers back to life, you will know the likely reason. Somewhere, in a vast building full of humming machines owned by a company you think of as a shop, something went briefly wrong and reminded the world how much of it is now quietly standing on Amazon's ground.